I had funded Anna for 7 years. Loved her for just as long. She finally agreed to be with me. But later, I found out the truth. She had always loved her childhood friend, the boy she grew up with. She resented me, thought I was humiliating her by throwing money at her. For 10 years after we got married, she was cold, distant. Eventually, she moved out to live with him. I was left alone in an empty house, wasting away in solitude until my life withered into nothing. Then, I opened my eyes, reborn on the very day I had decided to sponsor her. Anna's childhood friend stood in front of her, shielding her like a knight, his voice shaking with indignation. "You think money makes you superior? We don't need your charity." I laughed. "You're overthinking it. I'd rather burn this money than spend a single dime on you." "George, you think money makes you superior? We don't need your charity." Henry stood protectively in front of Anna, his voice thick with anger. I wavered for a moment, my gaze locking onto Anna's. She was 20 years old at this time. There was still a trace of innocence in her face, her figure tall and slender beneath a faded linen dress. But she was too beautiful. Ethereal. Her porcelain skin and bright, starry eyes somehow made even the simplest dress look elegant. I took a step back, steadying myself against the desk behind me. How long had it been since I'd seen her like this? 10 years? Or 20? Too long. I couldn't even remember anymore. That life was already a past I had buried. Anna's eyes flickered with surprise as she watched me retreat. Henry kept ranting, but I couldn't hear a word. Everything was unfolding exactly as it had in my last life. Back then, she had refused my help, and I had insisted on giving it anyway. I had loved Anna for 7 years. I knew her struggles. Her father was a gambler, drowning himself in alcohol after losing every penny, coming home only to take his rage out on her and her mother. Until one day, her mother couldn't take it anymore. And left. Anna had been fending for herself ever since, picking up scraps, working odd jobs, surviving on scholarships. She and I should never have crossed paths. I was born into wealth, raised with every privilege. But she was brilliant. That was how she ended up in my world. Our private high school, always eager to boost its college acceptance rates, had given her a scholarship. And so, we became classmates. The rest of us were heirs to family legacies, coasting through life without a care, waiting to inherit our fortunes. But Anna was different. She knew what she wanted. She worked hard, studied harder. Poverty never made her ashamed. She carried herself with quiet dignity, never begging, never compromising. She was like a wild orchid thriving in a glasshouse, untouched by the indulgence around her. And I fell in love with her. I loved her so much that I couldn't bear to see her suffer. But I was young. Foolish. Convinced I knew what was best for her. So I kept forcing my kindness onto her, thinking I was helping. She had to rush to her evening job and barely had time for meals. So I started bringing her lunch from home. "Anna, the steak my nanny makes is the best, try it. And foie gras. My dad had it flown in specially. It's incredible." I had been spoiled my entire life, waited on hand and foot. Everyone around me indulged my every whim. I thought I was sharing the best of my world with her. But I never stopped to ask if she wanted it. The moment I set the lunchbox in front of her, the other students burst into laughter. "George, do you really think she even knows what foie gras is? She probably can't even afford chicken liver." I scowled. "Mind your damn business." I didn't notice how tightly Anna gripped the lunchbox, how her fingers had gone white. She hesitated for only a second before handing it back, her voice cold. "Thanks, but no thanks." "Don't be like that, Anna," one of the girls teased. "If you start dating George, you'll never have to work again." "Exactly. Your dad could gamble all he wants, and you'd never have to worry about tuition again." Laughter erupted around us. I slammed my hand on the table. "Shut the hell up." The room fell silent. Anna shot to her feet and walked out. I chased after her, pressing the lunchbox into her hands. "Anna, don't listen to them. Just eat, okay? You have work later, you need the energy." She stopped. Turned around. I froze. Her eyes burned with hatred. Raw and absolute. Young people have terrible memories. It wasn't long before I forgot all about that incident and went right back to pestering Anna. I even started studying seriously for her. Ended up getting into the same college as she did. My father was thrilled, so much so that he doubled my allowance. College life only made Anna busier. She lost her financial aid. The poverty stipend she was eligible for was snatched away by a classmate with the right connections. At her lowest point, she survived on nothing but a single bread roll from the cafeteria each day. I couldn't stand watching her struggle. I offered to sponsor her again, but she refused. She worked 3 jobs, pushing herself to the brink, until one day, she collapsed in the street. That was my breaking point. I grabbed her, refusing to let go. Anna, why won't you just take my money? Why are you breaking yourself like this? For what? I went behind her back to her professor and paid her tuition in full. At that time, I understood a lot of things. I knew better than to trample on her pride. So, instead of handing her money outright, I found other ways. I always made sure to eat with her, pretending I couldn't finish my food so she'd share it with me. When we went out, I told her I'd scored free tickets and insisted she come along. Bit by bit, our relationship seemed to grow closer. I funded her all the way through graduation. And because I wanted her to be happy, I even funded Henry, her childhood friend. After college, Anna started her own business. She had always been brilliant. Back in school, she and her friends had developed a stock trading algorithm, but they struggled to secure investors. Every door she knocked on slammed shut. Watching her get beaten down by rejection drove me insane. So, I went to my father and had him invest in her company. That night, Anna was uncharacteristically quiet. I was half asleep, my arm draped around her, when she suddenly spoke. "George, why are you doing this?" I thought I knew what she meant. "Why are you so good to me?" So I answered without hesitation. "Because I love you." "Anna, do you love me?" I reached for her hand, teasing. It was just a joke. A light-hearted question. But she didn't answer. I took her silence as consent. And so, we became a couple. 2 years later, we got married. It was a simple wedding. Anna said she didn't like big crowds, so we kept it small, just a few close family members and friends. My family and my friends. She had no one. After the wedding, she remained distant. Back then, I was so naive. I thought it was just her nature, reserved, slow to warm up. I had loved her for years. If I just kept loving her, kept being good to her, she would come around. I never considered the possibility that she wouldn't. Because her heart had never been mine to begin with. By our 3rd year of marriage, the cracks had become irreparable. Her indifference was unbearable. I confronted her. Demanded to know if she still loved Henry. She met my accusations with silence, her gaze cold and unreadable. When I pushed too hard, she would simply walk away. Her apathy drove me mad. Every time she returned, I would lash out. Scream at her. Say the ugliest things just to get a reaction. Until one night, in the middle of our worst fight, I spat out words I could never take back. "If I had known you'd be like this, I would have gotten a dog instead, at least it would have wagged its tail at me." For the first time, I saw something flicker in her expression. Anger. But only for a fleeting moment. Then, just like that, she shut down again. And after that night, she never came home again. I later learned the truth. She had been with Henry all along. They had built a home together. She was even carrying his child. While she basked in the warmth of her new family, I rotted in the emptiness of our old house, my love curdling into poison. Anna's business flourished. She became wealthier than even my father. I had no way to make her suffer. All I had left was our marriage. So I used it to destroy her. I refused to divorce her. No matter how much money she offered, I wouldn't let her go. She had ruined me, and I would ruin her right back. The man she loved would forever remain in the shadows, nothing more than a disgraceful homewrecker. The child she bore would always be a bastard born in secrecy. Anna never dared to take me to court. She knew that a high-profile divorce scandal could tank her company's stock, and the other board members would never forgive her for it. And so, we remained locked in battle. For 10 years, we dragged each other through hell. No matter how much I screamed, raged, begged. She never wavered. Never looked back. And as the years wore on, my body withered under the weight of my own despair. I grew weaker. Then, I fell ill. And finally, I died. George? Anna's voice snapped me back to reality. A surge of hatred, dark and all-consuming, coursed through my veins. My heart pounded so violently that I nearly lost my footing. She must have been relieved when I died. No, more than that. She must have wanted me to die. I still remembered how, near the end, my medication had suddenly changed. When I questioned the butler, he told me it was just a milder formula. I hadn't thought much of it. But soon after taking it, my health deteriorated at an alarming rate. I could barely sit up. And before long, I was dead. It was her. If not her, who else could it be? She had hated me so much, hated me enough to want me gone for good. She wanted to marry Henry. How ruthless. I stared at Anna, barely holding back the urge to strangle her with my own hands. I hated her. I had never wronged her, not once. Yes, maybe when I was younger, I hadn't fully understood how to protect her pride. But I had never forced her into anything. Even when I proposed marriage, I gave her a choice. I told her I was willing to wait if she wasn't ready. And yet, she still hated me. Henry, just like in my past life, was shouting at me with righteous indignation. George, you think money makes you superior? Who the hell do you think you are to humiliate us like this? Take your damn money and get lost. I turned my gaze to him. Henry had a decent face, I supposed. But dressed in his faded, slightly worn-out sportswear, he looked just as insignificant as before. This was the man Anna loved. The man she would rather die than give up. The man she had chosen over me. It had been the same in my last life. Back then, Anna and I had been having a civil conversation. I had told her that if she was uncomfortable with taking my money, she could always pay me back in the future when she earned her own. It was Henry who had flown into a rage, accusing me of using money to humiliate her. At the time, I hadn't fully understood. But as the years passed and our fights grew more vicious, the truth became clear. Anna had always believed that I was using money to degrade her. How laughable. Now, watching Henry play the protective hero, I felt nothing but cold amusement. My lips curled into a smirk. You're overthinking it. I'd rather burn this money than spend a single dime on either of you. Anna's face drained of color. Henry froze for a moment, his expression going blank. What did you just say? I smiled. You think my sponsorship was an insult, don't you? We're classmates, I wouldn't want to offend you like that. If that's how you feel, then let's forget about it. You two can go ahead and keep working your part-time jobs. Henry's family situation was just as bad as Anna's. His father had disappeared after racking up mountains of debt, leaving his mother to work herself to the bone just to support him. Now, she was too sick to even get out of bed. Maybe that was why he and Anna were so close, bound by the same hardships. He was always by her side, always clinging to her. Whenever I took Anna out, he would find a way to tag along. If I hesitated, he would challenge me right in front of her. George, what's wrong? Are you looking down on me because I'm poor? Before I could even respond, Anna would tighten her grip on his arm and say coldly, if you think we don't deserve to be here, then we won't go. And just like that, I had no choice but to let him come. At dinner, he would stare at the seafood on his plate and mutter, do you eat like this every day? We really do live in different worlds, huh? More than once, Anna and I had been enjoying a pleasant conversation when he would suddenly drop a comment like that. And every time, the laughter would vanish from Anna's face. She would stop talking to me altogether. At first, I thought he was just being careless with his words. Then, one day, while walking with Anna, I turned back to say something to him. And caught the look in his eyes. Pure malice. Hatred. The moment our gazes met, he was visibly startled. Then, he forced a grin, as if nothing had happened. But my blood ran cold. That was the moment I finally understood. He didn't just dislike me. He despised me. Or rather, he hated me for taking Anna away. When Anna and I first got married, we actually had a brief period of peace. Her company had finally gained traction, securing its first major contract. At the celebration party, she was tipsy, clinging to me with a bright, unguarded smile. George, tell me what you like, I'll buy it for you. I knew how hard she had worked to earn that money, so I just held her close and smiled. There's no need. Your company is still in its early stages, you should save your money. Just knowing you want to do something for me is enough. But she refused to let it go, draping herself around my shoulders, slurring playfully, I make money so I can spend it on you. I'll buy you a car. Tell me what kind of car you like. Even as she drifted off to sleep, she mumbled under her breath. George. I have money now. You don't have to lower yourself for me anymore. We don't have to suffer together. And the next day, true to her word, she bought me a car. But before I could even thank her, Henry appeared. He looked at the keys in my hand, his expression shifting strangely. Then, with a laugh, he plucked them right out of my grasp and turned to Anna. "Oh wow, I remember this car. George had the exact same model in college. One of his friends gave it to him, right? He thought it was too cheap, so he never even bothered to drive it." I had no idea if that was true. I had long since forgotten. But Anna's face darkened instantly. Without a word, she took the keys from my hand and walked away. From that moment on, she began to grow distant. And the next time I saw that car, it was Henry who was driving it. He smirked at me, pretending to be casual. "Anna gave me the car, George. You don't mind, do you?" Of course, I minded. I demanded he return it. For a split second, hatred flashed across his face. Then he raised his voice. "You have so many cars already, why are you fighting me over this one? This is the only car I have. Why can't you just let me have it?" Anna yanked my arm away from him, her face cold. "Let go. If you didn't even care about it, why are you making a fuss now? Or do you just enjoy taking things from others?" Back then, I was too proud to swallow my anger. We had a huge fight. It ended in silence. But now, I finally understood. Henry wasn't talking about the car. He was talking about Anna. He had always believed that I stole her from him. And for that, he would never forgive me. "George." Anna suddenly grabbed my wrist, her fingers tightening in desperation. I turned around, startled by the frantic look in her eyes. Emotion surged beneath the surface, too strong to be contained, as if something inside her was about to break free. Even her voice trembled. "No, this isn't right. George, why aren't you sponsoring me? Don't you love me?" Her hysteria took me off guard. Had she lost her mind? Was she upset because I had spoken to Henry so harshly? But in my past life, she had never cared about me at this point. She had always been cold, distant, utterly indifferent. Was she having some kind of episode? I tried to yank my hand free. "Let go." But she only held on tighter, her eyes turning red at the edges. "George, do you not love me anymore? Are you abandoning me?" I was genuinely shaken now. Anna had never, not once, said anything like this to me before. I stared at her, wide-eyed. "Anna. Are you sick?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at me, unwavering and unblinking, her gaze obsessive and manic. Anger flared inside me. After everything she did to me in our last life, she still had the audacity to look at me like this? "Didn't you say my money was an insult to you, Anna?" I snapped. Henry's mouth fell open, stunned. Of course, in our last life, I had been deeply infatuated with Anna at this point. Back then, I had been careful with every word, terrified of hurting her pride. But now? I didn't care. "Anna, who the hell do you think you are?" Contempt dripped from my voice. Ungrateful. Heartless. I couldn't believe I had ever loved this woman. Yet, to my surprise, she didn't lash out. She didn't even get angry. She just went deathly pale, as if all the blood had drained from her body. I ripped my hand from her grip and walked away without looking back. Before Rebirth, I had given Anna a bank card with $200,000. Enough to cover all her tuition and living expenses. This time, I used the money on myself. Why should I suffer for her sake again? At least if I bought a watch, I could tell the time. Back then, Anna never gave me anything. Not for my birthday. Not for anniversaries. Not for any holiday. Every single year, I picked out the perfect gifts for her, but she never once returned the gesture. She either forgot or simply didn't care. Meanwhile, Henry transformed overnight into a rich boy. With Anna's money, he bought cars, watches, designer clothes. And every time he got something new, he made sure to show it off in front of me. "George, check this out, Anna got this for me in Paris." "What did she get you?" Then he would smirk. "Wait, let me guess. Nothing, right?" And every time, I would lose my temper. And every time, Anna and I would fight. Thinking back now, I realized, why had I ever cared? I had more money than I knew what to do with. Why had I ever wanted anything from her? So, this time, I added another 100 grand to the 200,000 and bought myself a Vacheron Constantine. On my way back to campus, the moment I stepped out of the car, I spotted Henry and Anna. Henry's eyes locked onto my wrist. For a brief second, his expression twisted, pure hatred and envy. Right now, Anna was still broke, and so was Henry. His old sweatpants were pilling at the seams, the fabric worn thin. Even though he had meticulously trimmed the loose threads and ironed them smooth, one glance was enough to tell they were cheap street market leftovers. "George," he sneered, fists clenched, "you really are rich, huh?" He forced out a laugh, but his voice was tight with resentment. "A Vacheron Constantin. That must have cost a fortune. One watch probably costs more than our entire college tuition combined." Then, as if seeking validation, he leaned toward Anna and murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "We really do live in different worlds. In my past life, would have scrambled to defend myself. I had always struggled to explain things to Anna, and the more I tried, the more annoyed she became. But this time, I simply smiled. So you're not just poor, you're also an idiot. You're only realizing this now. I live in a 5,000 square foot mansion in the heart of the city. You live in a cramped, 300 square foot house in the slums. Of course we're not from the same world." Henry's face turned an ugly shade of green. His features twisted in rage. I stepped closer, staring him down. "Henry," I said slowly, enunciating every word. "You will never, never, be in the same world as me. You'll be jealous to death." "Anna." He reacted quickly and tried to act pitiful in front of Anna. I sneered. "What else can you do, other than hide behind a woman like a pathetic little leech? You scurry around like a sewer rat, disgusting. And don't bother running to Anna. You two are the same filth. Equally revolting." That day, after cursing them out, I went home in a great mood. It wasn't that I had no desire for revenge. I still remembered how, in my past life, someone had tampered with my medication. But in this life, it hadn't happened yet, I had no proof. And more importantly, I wasn't about to waste my time on trash like them. I had already spent an entire lifetime trapped in that miserable cycle. This time, I wanted to stay as far away from them as possible. Whatever happened to them was none of my business. I had a new life now, and I intended to live it on my own terms. But even though I wanted to distance myself, they just wouldn't stay away. A few days later, one of my friends came looking for me, grinning like he was about to deliver the best gossip of the year. "George, you're not gonna believe this. Since you cut off Anna and Henry, they're struggling like hell. They can't even pay tuition. I heard Anna's been working herself to the bone, taking on every part-time job she can find. And Henry," my friend laughed, shaking his head, "that idiot tried to buy a new pair of pants the other day. The price tag was $80, and he couldn't even afford it. He had to sell that iPhone you gave Anna just to scrape together enough money for tuition." I frowned, trying to recall that memory. Ah, right. In my past life, I had noticed that Anna's phone was old and worn out, so I had gifted her the latest iPhone. The very next day, I saw Henry using it. Lowering my gaze, I scoffed. "Really? That's pretty poor." I had barely taken 2 steps when Henry appeared out of nowhere, blocking my path. His face was red with agitation, his hand clutching my sleeve like a desperate man grasping at straws. "George, why did you stop funding Anna?" he demanded, his voice thick with anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done? She's top of her class. If she gets held back because of tuition, can you live with that on your conscience?" For a moment, I just stared at him. Then, I burst out laughing. Back then, it had taken me years to truly understand people like Henry. Always wanting other people's money. But too damn proud to ask for it properly. The sheer shamelessness was astounding. And what does her being first in her class have to do with me? I shrugged. "I'm not her father." "How can you say that?" By now, other students had started to gather around, drawn in by the commotion. Seeing an audience, Henry got even more worked up. He pointed at me like I was some kind of villain. "You spent the price of our entire college tuition on a single watch. What's wrong with using some of your money to help people who actually need it? Or are you just that selfish? You'd rather waste money than support someone with real talent?" He must have thought he could guilt-trip me. He must have thought everyone was as easily manipulated as Anna. Before I could respond, my friend, who had the same privileged background as me but a much shorter fuse, stepped in with a cold sneer. "And which mental institution forgot to lock its doors and let you out? If you want money, go beg on the street. Get a damn job. Why the hell should George fund you? You've got arms and legs, don't you?" Why are you acting like someone owes you a living? Is George your father? Henry was used to making passive-aggressive jabs, throwing shade from the shadows. He had never been called out so directly before. For a second, he was stunned into silence. Then, the other students chimed in. Yeah, why don't you apply for financial aid instead of mooching off other people? Henry took a step back, his eyes wide with disbelief. I let out a slow, mocking chuckle. I had always been generous, paying for meals, covering expenses when we went out, so naturally, my classmates sided with me. Henry, on the other hand? Other than Anna, what did he have? Nothing. There wasn't a single thing he could beat me at. Looking back now, if I hadn't been so blinded by my obsession with Anna in my past life, I wouldn't have even noticed Henry existed. Just then, Anna appeared. Anna. Henry rushed to her side, immediately playing the victim. I was just asking George to help you out a little. He has enough money to buy a dozen luxury watches, but he won't even lend you a hand. I don't know what I did to offend him, but he insulted me so terribly. Then, in the next breath, he turned to me and lowered his voice, pretending to be humble. George, I know you look down on me, but I'm only doing this for Anna. She's so talented. I was utterly disgusted. Henry was like a toad that had jumped onto my foot, not dangerous, but unbearably revolting. And the worst part? He was impossible to get rid of. Anna frowned slightly. You insulted him? I let out a cold laugh. Of course. This was how she always was. The moment Henry put on his wounded act, she wouldn't even stop to hear my side before reprimanding me. In my past life, I would have argued with her, gotten angry, and later sulked in silence. Not anymore. I looked her in the eye, my expression indifferent. That's right. I insulted him. But what happened next completely blindsided me. Anna didn't get mad. She lowered her gaze, her voice soft, almost gentle. Then Henry must have done something wrong to upset you. Then she turned to Henry and said, with an icy calmness. Apologize to George. I stood there, utterly stunned. For a second, I thought I might still be dreaming. Henry was just as dumbfounded. His eyes widened in disbelief. Anna, what did you just say? Anna's expression turned colder. I said, apologize. Henry looked shocked. And furious. How can you say that? And to be honest, I was just as confused. Anna was telling Henry to apologize to me? What the hell was going on? A wild thought flashed through my mind. Could she have been reborn too? But I quickly dismissed it. Impossible. In my past life, Anna had hated me with every fiber of her being. Hated me enough to poison me, to ensure my slow, agonizing death. If she had been reborn, she would have run as far away from me as possible. She must have some other scheme in mind. I took a step back, watching her warily. Anna's face twisted with pain, as if my reaction had cut her deep. George, she whispered. I know I was wrong before. Please, forgive me. You love me, don't you? Let's be together, okay? Whatever I owe you, I'll make it up to you. Her voice grew increasingly frantic, her eyes locking onto me as if I were something precious she had lost and desperately wanted back. By the end, her voice even carried the slightest tremor, as if she were on the verge of tears. It was absurd. I clenched my fists. In my past life, I had spent everything, my love, my time, my dignity, just to hear these words from her. And I never did. Not even once. Not even on my deathbed. But now, after all the humiliation, after all the hatred, now that I had finally let go, she was suddenly saying she loved me. Then what the hell was the point of my past life? What was the point of all that suffering? A scornful smirk curled at my lips. You want to be with me? I sneered. Anna, who the hell do you think you are? Do you really believe you're worthy of being with me? I looked her up and down in contempt. The price of one shirt on my back is worth more than 3 years of your labor. And yet, you think you belong at my side? Didn't she always feel insulted by my money? Then I'd show her what real humiliation looked like. Sure enough, her face went deathly pale. But still, she refused to back down. I don't have money now, she admitted, desperation creeping into her voice, but just wait for me, okay? I'll earn it. I will have money one day. That much was true. She had become incredibly wealthy in my past life. But what did that have to do with me? The bitterness, the hatred that had been festering inside me boiled over. I looked at her coldly and spat. Anna, even if every woman in the world disappeared, I still wouldn't be with you. That day, as I walked away, Anna remained frozen in place, her gaze locked onto me like a lost soul. She looked utterly miserable, her shoulders slumped, her entire presence drained of life, as if her very spirit had been sucked away. I didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy. All I had was cold amusement. I don't know what Anna's conspiracy is. Maybe she'd finally come to her senses. Maybe she'd completely lost her mind. Either way, it didn't matter. The George who had loved her so desperately, who had once given her everything, he had died in my past life. And he was never coming back. Without my financial support, Anna and Henry were struggling even more than in my last life. Anna never managed to sell her program. Her startup collapsed before it even took off. Last I heard, they were so broke they were considering selling their own blood just to scrape by. But that wasn't my concern anymore. The next morning, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Selena. For a moment, I was dazed. It had been over a decade since I had last seen this name. Back when I was with Anna, she had hated me having female friends. She also despised my wealthier social circle. Little by little, I had let go of those friendships. Selena and I had grown up together, our families had been close for generations. That car Henry had mocked. It had been a birthday gift from her. She had been so proud when she bought it, telling me it was her first big commission, a reward from her father, and that I had to take good care of it. But back then, my world had revolved around Anna. I hadn't cared about anything else. That car had ended up gathering dust in my garage. I picked up the call. The moment I answered, Selena's excited voice practically exploded through the speaker. George. I heard you finally told that Anna bitch off. Before I could respond, she continued, full of pent-up frustration. It's about time. That woman used you for everything, your money, your love, even your damn brain, and had you wrapped around her little finger. We couldn't even say anything back then because you were so obsessed with her. You've finally woken up, huh? A small smile tugged at my lips. What do you want? Party tonight. Usual place. 8 o'clock. You better be there. I hung up, and for a long time, I just stood there, staring at my phone. The usual place. It took me a while to remember, it was the bar we used to go to all the time. Back when I was still me. Back when my friends and I would drink, laugh, and live without a care in the world. But after I got with Anna, I had stopped going out altogether. I had always been bold, reckless, and unrestrained. Yet for love, I had clipped my own wings. I had abandoned my world for hers. I had stopped going to high-end malls, choosing instead to browse street markets and thrift shops. I had stopped wearing luxury brands, carefully picking out cheap, plain clothes, just so she wouldn't frown when she stood next to me. I had avoided the restaurants I used to love, settling instead for hole-in-the-wall diners because they were all she could afford. I had shrunk myself, bent over backward, twisted into something small and careful, all for her. I had loved her with everything I had. And in the end, it had meant nothing. That night at the bar, Selena was in high spirits, constantly urging me to drink. I didn't refuse. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Unburdened. These friends, my friends, had always been good to me. Especially Selena. Even back when I got married, she had told me that if Anna ever mistreated me, I should come to her, she would personally teach Anna a lesson. And she actually had. Back then, Anna had just gotten pregnant. I had been overjoyed, naively thinking that having a child together would finally bring her heart back to me. I had been so eager, so full of hope, waiting for that little life to be born. Only to later discover, the child wasn't mine. It was Henry's. I had gone insane. I had wrecked the house, smashed everything I could get my hands on. Anna and I had fought like never before, screaming, breaking things. And then, as if that wasn't enough, Henry had taken it even further. He started calling me in the middle of the night, on purpose. 2 a.m. 3 a.m. Just to let me hear them. Breathless gasps. Skin against skin. His voice, husky and taunting. Relax. I had vomited until my stomach was nothing but an empty, trembling pit of bile. By the end, I had collapsed against the bathroom tiles, shivering uncontrollably. I had looked up at my reflection. A man pale as a ghost. Bloodshot eyes. Tear-streaked face. Selina had found out and stormed into Anna's home. She had slapped her across the face so hard that Anna's lip split. If I hadn't pulled her back, she would have ripped every last strand of hair out of Anna's head. I had held her back as she screamed, her eyes blazing with fury. "You heartless bitch! Has a dog eaten your conscience? George did everything for you, and this is how you repay him?" Anna hadn't fought back. She had just stood there, silent, blood trailing from the corner of her mouth. "What are you thinking about?" Selina nudged me. "Drink." I clinked my glass against hers and downed it in one go. After a few rounds, her cheeks were flushed, and she leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You really don't like Anna anymore?" I glanced at her. The moment our eyes met, she quickly looked away, her ears tinged pink. It was almost funny. I had always known Selina had feelings for me. But in my past life, I had been so consumed by Anna that I had even fought with Selina over her. Yet even then, when Anna had treated me like garbage, Selina had still been the first to stand up for me. This time around, if I were to choose a wife, I wanted someone like her. I had finally realized that love alone couldn't fix everything. Anna and I had been too different. We had grown up in separate worlds, raised by vastly different circumstances. She had spent her entire childhood trapped in a home filled with violence and neglect. She had built her defenses early, sharp, unyielding, distrustful. I was spoiled by my family since I was young. My family gave me the confidence to give up everything to love someone, but this also became the cause of my tragedy. Because people like Anna. You could pour all your love into them, and they would still never melt. I nodded. Yeah. I was blind before. Selina lowered her head, her breath warm as she leaned in even closer. Then look at me. She never got to finish. Because someone grabbed me. Yanking me hard. I snapped my head around. And came face to face with Anna. Her expression was terrifying. Her face was pale, but her eyes were a storm of emotions I couldn't understand. Her body was tense, like a wire stretched to the breaking point. Her voice was quiet, eerily calm. "Come with me." I didn't want to cause a scene in front of my friends, so I followed her outside. The moment we stepped out, I ripped my arm away. "Let go." I glared at her with nothing but disgust. "Are you insane? What the hell is your problem now?" Anna didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at me. For a moment, I was struck by how different she looked. Since my rebirth, she had always been careful with me, soft, almost submissive. But now, her eyes were red. Her expression was crumbling, like she was barely holding something in. And when she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. "George, what did you just say?" I frowned. "What?" Her hands clenched into fists. "Say it again." Something in my chest tightened. But I still bit out. "I said I don't like you anymore. I was blind before." For a second, Anna just stood there. Then, she laughed. A quiet, strange laugh, almost hollow. Then, before I could react, she grabbed my collar, yanking me down until her eyes were level with mine. Cold. Sharp. And furious. Her voice was ice. "Say it again. George, all those things you told me. That you loved me, that you'd always be with me, that you'd never leave." Her breath was ragged. Was it all a lie? I went completely still. Because, had never said those words to her in this life. Those were things I had told her in my past life. Before our marriage. Before everything fell apart. So then. How did she know? Anna quickly realized her mistake. She took a step back, her face tense with unease. I exhaled slowly, my voice quiet but sharp. "Anna, you were reborn too, weren't you?" She didn't answer. The midnight wind howled through the empty streets, dragging fallen leaves across the pavement in a restless, hollow shuffle. A car passed by in the distance, its headlights cutting through the darkness for a brief moment before vanishing again into the night. I let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Anna," I murmured, my smile twisted. "How dare you?" She was actually reborn. How dare she come back to this life after everything she had done to me? How dare she stand in front of me now, saying those same words I had once believed in so foolishly? Last time, I had meant it. Every word, every promise, I had given them to her without hesitation. And in the end, I had died filled with nothing but regret. This time, I had finally let go. I had finally decided to move on. And yet, she had come back only to rip my wounds open again. To remind me that I would never truly escape the hell she had put me through. Anna's eyes flickered with panic. George, listen to me. Yes, I was reborn, but I understand everything now. I was stupid before. I didn't realize that I had already fallen in love with you. But it's not too late. Let me make it up to you. I hit her. Not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to make her feel it. She stumbled to the side, her head snapping to the right. I had never laid a hand on her before. Never hit her in our past life, even when she betrayed me in the worst possible way. But this time, I didn't regret it. Not for a second. I ground out every word, my voice shaking with fury. Anna. How dare you? How dare she say these words now, after everything? After she had destroyed me. How dare she act like her love, her sudden, newfound realization, could erase what she had done. I had put everything into that love. Given her my heart, my soul, my entire life. And in return, she had left me to die. The force of my slap had split her lip. A thin trail of blood welled at the corner of her mouth. But she barely reacted. She wiped the blood away with the back of her hand, her expression eerily calm. Is that enough? If it's not, she said, grabbing my wrist and pressing my hand against her swollen cheek, hit me again. Her voice was hard, defiant. But her eyes were red. And then, for the first time in all the years I had known her, Anna cried. Tears slid down her face, silent, unrestrained. I froze. Anna had never cried. Not once. Not when her father gambled away her tuition money and then beat her for asking about it. Not when she worked 3 jobs, starving and exhausted, collapsing in the street from hunger and fatigue. She never cried. But now. Now she was standing in front of me, crying. And I didn't know what to do with that. Anna's tears mixed with the blood on her lips, washing away the last traces of composure she had left. Her body trembled, collapsing in on itself as if she could no longer hold everything inside. Then, in a voice so broken it barely sounded like hers, she begged. George, come back. If you hate me, if you want to kill me, fine. Just, don't leave me. I felt like I was about to lose my mind. Anna, are you insane? What the hell is wrong with you? She lowered her head, her voice trembling. I had such low self-esteem that I was always on guard and felt like everyone wanted to hurt me. You were so good to me. So perfect. You weren't from my world. I thought that if I let myself love you, if I let myself believe that you truly loved me, one day you'd wake up and tell me it was all just a joke, that I wasn't good enough for you after all. I was a fool. I was a coward. Hate me, punish me, I don't care, just please, please come back. Her sobs tore through the rain, raw and unrestrained. You have no idea what it was like after you left me. I let out a slow, cold laugh. Anna, weren't you in love with Henry? Didn't you poison me in my past life so you could be with him? Anna froze. Poison, she echoed. What poison? I stared at her, my fists clenching. Don't pretend you don't know. I gripped the railing beside me, grounding myself. If I didn't, I wasn't sure I could stop myself from striking her again. My medication was switched. I was getting better, and then suddenly, the more I took, the worse I got, until in the end, I bit down hard on my tongue. The bitterness flooded my mouth, but it couldn't drown out the truth. The woman I had loved had killed me for another man. Even just saying it aloud was unbearable. I didn't. Anna's voice was desperate, her breath coming fast. I never did that. I even told the butler to take good care of you. Why would I ever want to kill you? Our eyes locked, realization hitting us both at the same time. If it wasn't Anna, then the only other person with access to my medication, the only other person who wanted me dead, was Henry. Henry had been the one who killed me. A strange mix of emotions churned inside me, but there was no shock. No disbelief. Only a quiet, exhausted acceptance. Did it even matter? Dead was dead. Whether it was Anna or Henry, it had all been because of her. She may not have poisoned me with her own hands, but she had given him the reason to do it. And that was enough. The weight of it all settled into my bones, numbing me. Love. Hate. None of it mattered anymore. I was tired. All I wanted in this life was to stay as far away from her as possible. The cold autumn rain began to pour, soaking through our clothes in seconds. Anna stood there, ruined in the storm, her face streaked with water and tears, indistinguishable from each other. "George, please." I stared at her blankly. Then, with a flat, empty voice, I asked. "And Henry? You had a child with him in our past life, didn't you?" Anna's lips parted, but no words came out. It took her a long time to finally whisper. "He got me drunk. It only happened once." I let out a low, scornful laugh. "I didn't say anything. I didn't need to." Anna dropped her head further, her voice barely above a whisper. "From the beginning to the end, I only ever loved you. I never loved Henry." And then, from the shadows of the empty street, a low, dangerous voice spoke. "Then what am I?" Henry stepped out from the shadows. The rain had soaked through his worn-out tracksuit, the fabric clinging to his thin frame. "Anna." His expression was eerily blank, but his eyes were filled with madness. "You love him, so what does that make me? All these years, I stayed by your side, what was I to you?" Anna clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. But when she looked at him, there was no trace of her usual gentleness. Only hatred. Henry froze. "You hate me? Anna, you actually hate me?" Her voice was cold, cutting like a blade. "If you hadn't spent years poisoning my relationship with George, we never would have ended up like this." Henry let out a laugh, short and sharp. "I poisoned it?" His facade cracked completely, revealing the twisted truth beneath. "Anna," he scoffed, dropping the act entirely, "if you weren't so insecure and self-righteous, do you really think I could have manipulated you? You were the one who was always afraid to want him, afraid to trust him. So you used me. Every time you clung to me, every time you let me provoke him, it was just so you could force him to prove how much he loved you. Over and over again. You needed that validation to satisfy your own sick, twisted mind." Anna's nails dug deeper into her palms, her knuckles turning white. Henry tilted his head at me, his gaze full of something dark and unreadable. "George," he murmured, almost as if he were asking something casual. "You had everything. So why did you have to take Anna from me?" But he didn't wait for my answer. He wasn't really asking. "You were born with everything handed to you, money, power, admiration. People surrounded you, loved you, worshipped you. Anything you wanted, people would place in your hands before you even had to ask for it." His voice trembled, his grip tightening. "So why, George? Why did you have to take her? She was the only thing I had. The only one. You already had so much, why couldn't you just let me have one thing?" I met his eyes, my voice steady. "Anna is a person. Who she loves is her choice. I never forced her to be with me. And in the end, I never won anyway. I was the one who lost everything." Henry's lips curled, his expression darkening. "Is that so?" That was when I noticed. One of his hands had been hidden behind his back the entire time. A sick feeling surged in my gut. Just as I started to step back, he lunged. The glint of metal flashed under the streetlights. "Die, George." His face contorted, pure insanity warping his features. "As long as you're dead, Anna will be mine again. Why do you get to be happy? You should have died a long time ago." He was too close. Too fast. I had no time to dodge. In that split second, my pupils shrank, and the only thing I saw was his bloodshot eyes. But before the blade could reach me, a force slammed into my side, shoving me away. A sickening, muffled thud. The sound of steel slicing through flesh. The pouring rain drowned out the noise, but I heard it. I felt it. Henry's eyes went wide, his fingers trembling around the hilt of the knife. "Anna?" I stumbled back, my breath caught in my throat. Anna stood in front of me. The blade buried deep in her abdomen. Blood seeped out in waves, swirling into the rain, turning the water around us a sickly shade of pink. But she didn't react to the pain. She didn't even look at Henry. Instead, she turned her head toward me. And smiled. "As long as you're okay." By the time we got to the hospital, Anna had already lost consciousness. She had lost too much blood. They rushed her straight into the ICU. Henry was taken away by the police. It wasn't until the third day that Anna finally woke up. I stepped into the hospital room. There were so many things I wanted to say, words stuck in my throat, tangled and unmoving. She looked weak. Pale as a sheet. And yet, she still forced a small, fragile smile. "George, are you okay?" I stared at her, emotions too tangled to sort through. "Why did you block that knife for me?" She lowered her lashes, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I just didn't want you to get hurt." Henry's knife had been aimed at my heart. If she hadn't stepped in, I wouldn't be standing here right now. "What do you plan to do?" I asked suddenly. She understood immediately, her lips twisting into a bitter smile. "I'll tell the truth. I'll handle it however it needs to be handled." I leaned against the empty hospital bed across from her. "In our past life, you had his child." Her voice was quiet but firm. "But he killed you." Silence. Anna coughed, the movement making her wince in pain. Then, in a hoarse voice, she murmured. "George. I really know I was wrong. I made so many mistakes. If I could change." Her voice broke. Her lips trembled violently, as if she could barely force the words out. "If I could change, would you?" "No." I cut her off. "You saved me, but in our past life, I died because of you. At best, we're even. Blocking the knife for me doesn't undo all the damage you've done to me before." Her eyes turned red, her teeth sinking into her lower lip to suppress her sobs. "But George, you said you would love me forever." I let out a tired, hollow laugh. "Anna, love doesn't last forever. You spent 10 years wearing mine down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left." Her face drained of color. For the first time, she looked truly lost. "George, you can't do this. You were the one who said you loved me first." I turned to leave. Before stepping out, I cast her one last glance. She had grown so thin. The hospital gown hung loose over her frail frame. Her face, those familiar, delicate features, still belonged to the girl I had once loved. But her soul was old. Tired. Perhaps, in another time, in another world, we really had loved each other. But the timing had never been right. "But now," I murmured softly. "Anna, I really don't love you anymore." As I walked out, I could still hear her breaking down behind me. "George, then what about me? Why did I come back, if only to hear you say you don't love me anymore? I should have just died in our past life." I lowered my gaze, eyes dry and aching. I couldn't cry anymore. Because in my past life, I had already cried every tear I had to give. I kept walking. Faster. Further. Until, at last, I couldn't hear her anymore. Anna didn't try to protect Henry. He was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 7 years in prison. The university expelled him. I didn't bother attending the trial. By then, I had already figured it out, Henry's hatred had never really been about Anna. It wasn't love that had driven him mad. It was jealousy. Jealousy that I had everything. Jealousy that no matter how hard he tried, he could never truly take Anna from me, not in the way he wanted. And when he realized that even Anna had slipped through his fingers, he lost it completely. During his sentencing, he snapped, hurling insults at the judge, raving like a madman. By the time he was dragged out of the courtroom, he wasn't even coherent anymore. I had a word with my father. Made sure that Henry would be well taken care of during his time behind bars. After all, I never forgot what he had done to me in our past life. In the end, he would repay every last bit of what he owed me. 3 years later, I married Selina. Our families treated it as the grand event of the season, extravagant, luxurious, attended by the most influential figures in the city. Just as we were about to step onto the stage, my secretary rushed over, carrying a small envelope. There was nothing written on it. "Mr. George, inside the envelope is a bank card." I checked, it's real. "But there's no sender." He frowned. "What should we do?" Selina and I exchanged glances. We both already knew who had sent it. She let out a small laugh. "Well, if someone insists on throwing money at us, we might as well take it." Just then, my phone vibrated. A text message. No sender name. No context. Just a single line. "If you ever stop loving her, come back to me. I'll always be waiting." Selina glanced over my shoulder, snorted, and rolled her eyes. Then she might as well wait forever. Even in the next life, she won't get her chance. I deleted the message without hesitation. Blocked the number. Then, turning back to Selena, I took her hand, smiling softly. Come on, I said. They're all waiting for us. The dark nights were over. And I would never look back again.
When I saw George again, I froze. He was 20. Full of life, full of energy, nothing like the weary, broken man I remembered. I couldn't look away. My gaze clung to him, desperate, hungry. It had been so long since I had last seen George. When the butler told me he was dead, I hadn't believed it. Not until I went home and saw his cold, lifeless body. And the strangest thing was, I hadn't felt anything. For a moment, everything around me disappeared. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear. And then, I collapsed. I didn't even realize it had happened until someone caught me, trying to help me up. I looked at the butler and asked calmly, "Did he leave any last words?" The butler shook his head. "Sir didn't say anything." Oh. So he hadn't left me a single word. Not even one. I suppose it made sense. We had already said everything that could be said. When we were young, when he still loved me, he had filled my ears with sweet words and promises. Later, when we turned against each other, we had torn each other apart with the cruelest insults. He had screamed that I would die miserable and alone. I had spat that he was pathetic and disgusting. What was left to say? Nothing. The good, the bad. All of it had already been said. And yet, that was when I first felt it. A dull, throbbing pain in my chest. It started out subtle, almost ignorable. But then, it spread, like poison seeping through my veins. It burrowed through me, carving holes into my heart until it was nothing but a hollow, bleeding wound. I gasped, dropping to my knees, clutching at my chest. I turned to George. He lay there, motionless, unresponsive. If this had been before, no matter how much we had fought, no matter how cruel our words had been, he still would have come to me. He was always like that, always so stupidly kind. But this time, he didn't even spare me a glance. Of course not. He was dead. Completely, utterly dead. Gone forever. Never to stand before me again. I wasn't sad. I felt nothing. It was like watching someone else's story unfold, like my body and mind had split into two separate people. The pain in my chest was not my pain. It belonged to someone else. And all I could think was, how inconvenient. I have a meeting tomorrow. Now I have to delay it for a funeral. A faint tickle scratched at my throat. I coughed lightly, only to see the butler's expression twist in horror. "Madam," he choked out, his voice unsteady. I looked down. Scarlet droplets stained my chest. Blood. Whose blood? I frowned. And then, a sharp, uncontrollable cough tore through me. I spat blood. A mouthful of it. The butler panicked, grabbing me, shouting for a doctor. But my mind was blank, because there was only one thought echoing in my head. Oh, it turns out this is my blood. After George died, I didn't shed a single tear. I even went home and packed up his things. He didn't own much anymore. For someone who used to indulge in luxury, his room was nearly empty, just a few cheap clothes from bargain bins scattered across his closet. Good, I thought. After everything, after all these years of torment, we had finally come to an end. But then, I opened the cabinet and saw an entire shelf lined with medicated oil. I froze. A long time ago, when I was working as a delivery driver, I had been in a car accident. The injury had never fully healed. Every time it rained, my leg ached so badly I could barely stand. This was the oil he had specially commissioned for me. I remember teasing him about it, laughing at how ridiculous it was for him to stock up so much. But he had only smiled as he massaged my calf, his voice light and easy. What if one day we run out? But we never ran out. Because after we got married, I hardly ever came home. And when I did, we spent every second fighting. In the end, I had barely used these at all. Not even half a bottle. I had almost forgotten. We used to have good times too. I used to think he was wonderful. Before everything turned so ugly, before we destroyed each other beyond recognition. I felt a strange warmth on my face. I reached up and realized I was crying. I didn't even know when the tears had started falling. I thought I would forget George quickly, that I would move on without looking back. But after his death, he haunted me. Every night, he appeared in my dreams, as if deliberately torturing me. Sometimes, he was young again, smiling, pushing his lunchbox toward me with an easy grin. "Anna, my housekeeper made steak today. It's the best, try it." Strange. At the time, I had thought he was arrogant, overbearing. I had hated him for forcing things onto me. But now, in my dreams, I could see it. That pure, unguarded love. That sincerity. Back then, I never realized. That was his favorite dish. And he had just wanted to share it with me. Freely. Without hesitation. And I had never deserved a love so precious. I had been too insecure, too full of self-loathing. I had been raised in darkness. And when a boy like him, so bright, so warm, stumbled into my world, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't trust it. I thought he was toying with me, So I had pushed him away, hurt him, over and over. I wanted him gone. He was an anomaly in my universe, this rare, foreign species that disrupted everything I knew. But I was also selfish. I wanted to test him, again and again, to make sure he wouldn't leave, to prove that his love was real. How pathetic. How despicable. After we got married, things got better. For a while. But Henry never let me forget that George and I would never be the same. You're not from his world, Anna. You never will be. And he was right. I had gone out of my way to buy him a car, so excited to finally give him something, only to later find out that one of his college admirers had already gifted him the same model. What did I ever have to offer him? At the time, I hadn't understood my own heart. I truly thought I hated him, but I couldn't stop getting close. I kept bringing Henry around, knowing it would hurt him. And when I saw the pain in his eyes, I had fed on it, like a parasite, like an addict, because it meant he still cared. He still loved me. How sick. How twisted. And then, in my dreams, he changed. He was no longer that boy with a bright, reckless smile. He lay on the hospital bed with cold eyes. Anna, I don't love you anymore. I woke up gasping, heart pounding. Every night, the dream repeated. Sometimes I was happy. Sometimes I was terrified. And then one night, sitting alone in my dark bedroom, I finally understood. I was the one who couldn't let go. I was the one trapped in the past. Because the truth was, I had already loved him. Long, long ago. And I had been too blind to see it. By the 3rd year after George's death, I had lost my mind completely. I abandoned Henry and the child. No matter how much he raged, no matter how desperately he begged, I didn't care. I simply looked at him with cold, lifeless eyes and said, "You were the one who insisted on having this child. It has nothing to do with me." And then I walked away. I never looked back. On George's birthday, I took sleeping pills with alcohol. The unbearable pain in my chest finally began to dull, fading into numbness. And then, the warmth of sunlight kissed my skin. Birdsong filled the air. And someone took my hand, warm, solid, alive. I turned my head and saw George, 20-year-old George, smiling at me. "Anna," he said, his voice full of laughter. "What took you so long?" I stared at him, vision blurring with heat, with tears that I refused to let fall. Slowly, I turned toward him. I threw my arms around him, holding on so tightly as if he might vanish. He stiffened in shock, trying to push me away. "What's wrong? Who bullied you?" But then he sighed and hugged me back, laughing softly. "What's gotten into you? Did you miss me or something?" My voice trembled, breaking apart. "Yes, George. I did. If only we could stay like this forever. If only time could freeze in this moment. If only I never had to hear him say those words. Anna, I don't love you anymore." That was the moment I truly understood what it meant to have your heart shattered beyond repair. I woke up screaming, sobbing, my entire body racked with pain, my throat raw from how violently I cried. "Why? Why did you bring me back?" I had thought the second chance was for me to fix things, to make things right, to win him back. But instead, I had lost him completely. My chest caved in with pain, making it impossible to breathe. I laughed, and then I cried harder. I was going insane. Or maybe I had never been so clear-headed in my life. Because now I understood. My rebirth wasn't for redemption. It was for atonement. To suffer everything he suffered. To taste every drop of pain I had inflicted on him. Death isn't true separation. But he was truly, completely gone. And for the rest of my life, I would never escape this endless, suffocating despair.